I'd like to speak with you about the khsSherpa open source framework. It's a framework that allows you to turn a Java application server into a remote JSON data server. It supports native or hybrid mobile application development or HTML5 based JavaScript interfaces. The implementation is available on GitHub. It's open source, publicly available at this URL. So without further ado, I'd like to jump into an actual demo of the framework. Here I have the Spring Source Tool Suite IDE. I have a simple web application defined in the Maven project format as a Maven project. I'm using khsSherpa, which comes with STS. Essentially, this is just Eclipse, and it could be any Java application server, Tomcat, for instance. And in order to bring Sherpa into make it visible to this web application, I define it as a dependency in the POM file, as you can see here. Version 1.0, it's publicly available in Maven Central. And then the other requirement is to enable Sherpa's servlet, which is what's going to be listening for your URLs via HTTP. And this is done by registering the framework supplied servlet in the web XML file, as you can see here. I have a servlet defined. It's the framework supplies Sherpa servlet. I can name the servlet whatever I want and give it whatever servlet name and URL pattern I desire. In this case, I just called it Sherpa. So then the only other requirement before we start writing JSON endpoints in Java is to tell Sherpa where these endpoints are going to live as Java objects, and that's done by defining a Sherpa.properties file in the class path or in the Maven resources folder. And here I have a Sherpa.properties that the framework will automatically look for this file and read it. And the only required entry in the framework is this endpoint package property. And this basically is going to, the value of this property is the package where your endpoints are defined. In this case, you'll see here it's in the com khs example endpoints. And if I look in my source folder, I can see this package exists, and I have a couple Java classes defined which are endpoints. And an endpoint, a Sherpa endpoint, is essentially a POJO, a Java class that has the framework supplied endpoint annotation defined. So an endpoint is basically a class, and these methods, or we call them actions, that are publicly defined, are all available to be accessed from a browser or from a remote device via the app server. So let's see that in action. The authenticate indicates that no authentication is required. They're publicly visible or available. So let's see this in action. So I have a test service endpoint, and I have one method, hello world, returns a result object. A result object is an inner class type that simply just has a object attribute. That way I can just arbitrarily put results in here and send them back as a result, and the Sherpa framework will serialize this into a JSON result. So we'll see that in action. I need to start my server, khsSherpa, and I have the web app added to it. So I'll start that up. And then while this is starting, I'll navigate to a web page that has a JSP defined in a project called Test Fixture JSP. This is a framework supplied JSP that helps exercise and test out endpoints, and essentially it's just a JSP page that has a form control on it where I can basically input values, and and submit the form that will call the Sherpa servlet. In this case, the endpoint class is the simple class name of my Sherpa endpoint. If you recall, it's test service. That's just a simple class name. It does not need to be fully qualified. Just the class name. And then, if you recall, I had a hello world method defined in that class. And if I submit that Sherpa, I should get back a result called hello world again and again. Okay, that's just that method being invoked and results coming back in JSON form. To show that there's no smoke and mirrors going on, let me modify this method a little bit. I say world, hello world again and again and again. Save it. And go back to my test and then give this method a call again, and we see that the new results come back, so the method was executed. Okay, that's pretty straightforward, but it shows you that I'm calling this browser is invoking a remote Java class. Let's make things a little more interesting and show you how parameters are automatically mapped and handled with the framework. So I'll define a method that returns a result object again, but I'll call it add, and in this case I want to add two doubles. I want to specify two numbers, add them together, and return that as a result. So let me do that here. Double X, double Y, result plus Y, and that's all that's essentially necessary. Oops, didn't spell that right. Save that. Now, the only thing I need to for the framework is I need to indicate the parameters that this method will be receiving from the client. So in Sherpa, to give it a meaningful parameter name, I use the param annotation, which is again supplied by the framework. It allows me to assign meaningful names to my parameter values of my method. Okay, and that's it. Now I've added this new method. Now I can go ahead and test this method out and invoke it from a client by simply going back to my test fixture JSP, changing the method name to add. That's the name of the method. I have a x value parameter, x value. I put in over there, y value, and submit form, and I get back my result. Okay, so you see how the framework handles parameter values. These can be any type, Boolean values, floats, integers. They can. The framework will map dates, Boolean values. It will automatically coerce it. And it'll also map JSON objects to reference type of actual classes. So it's quite robust in that regard. Let me show you another more interesting example. I've got a pre-built stock service. This is a little bit more realistic. I have a stock service endpoint that I created. Again, it's just a stock service class. Again, it's a non-authenticated endpoint, and I have basically I invoke a Yahoo API that basically allows me to get financial data, real-time financial data, or relatively real-time financial data from Yahoo in the form of CSV format. As you can see here, I'm calling this URL. I've got an inner class here called stock. That's my model. That's what I'm going to go ahead and send back to my client. I could have some kind of widget on the client or something that's going to go ahead and consume this JSON and present a UI or what have you. But then my method that I'm calling is called quote. And you see here I have a public quote method. I have it returning a stock, and I'm using this. I need to specify a argument or a parameter called ticker from my client. and that's going to be the ticker symbol. And then I go and I call the Yahoo URL, and I do some real expression parsing and stuff to parse out the commas. But essentially what I'm doing is creating a new stock object with this data and grabbing the parsed Yahoo data, the name, the trade date, the price, dividend yield, price to earnings, that kind of information, mapping it to my stock object and returning that. And then the SHERPA framework will serialize that to a JSON object for me. Okay, so let's see this in action. Again, I've got just a POJO stock service, and I got a method called quote. I'll come back to my test fixture, refresh this. Stock service, and the method name was quote, and the argument param I called was ticker, and let's do Goog for Google, and submit that, and I should get some real-time market data back from that. And as you can see here, I do. Right, I put in IBM, get a different one back. I get meaningful error codes if I put in a I misspell parameter name. I'll get a little meaningful error code back saying that there's an error. If I misspell a method name or action name, as we call it, I'll get an error saying that was not found. So as you can see, this is a pretty easy to use framework. As I indicated, there's a lot of other capabilities into it. It has authentication mechanisms. It will marshal and transfer not just primitive parameter types, but actual JSON serialized objects to and from the server. For a more in-depth handling of this, back out to the GitHub project. It's on GitHub, and you have full source, and it also has this example that you see here available that you can download and play around with the framework. I hope you find this useful, and thanks for your time.